Okay, we're here at Ghost Ranch in New Mexico. It's August 20th, 2017, and we're about to hold one of the interviews of Peace Corps volunteers who served in Korea. And I'll ask our interviewee to introduce himself and tell us where he was born and grew up.
My full name is Gary Clay Rector. I just go by Gary Rector. My family's from Kentucky, but my mother was temporarily in Toledo, Ohio when I was born. So I was born in Toledo, Ohio, and then went back down home and lived. So home is Kentucky as far as I'm concerned. But then later, for the sake of my education, my dad took me back to Toledo, and I went to high school in Toledo, Ohio, and I went to college in Kalamazoo, Michigan, of all places, which some people think is an imaginary place, but it really exists. So does Timbuktu. Anyway, and then after college, I stayed on. I worked as a guitar craftsman at the Gibson Guitar Factory, even though I majored in linguistics. It doesn't go together at all. But I did that for 2 years because I wanted to save money for grad school. I wanted to go to Indiana University to study linguistics in grad school, but I didn't really save up enough money, so I joined the Peace Corps and never came back. Yeah, so.
So what sort of linguistics were you studying?
Well, this is like when Chomsky was just coming into vogue with his generative grammar and stuff. But it's sort of an odd circumstance because the head of the linguistics department at Kalamazoo quit while I was in France for my junior year, and he quit and went to someplace in Canada. He was a British guy. And so they canceled the linguistics department. So although I had all the courses, I had to take my degree in English Lit and French Lit, double major. But I had the linguistics courses. So I got upset about that. So I transferred my credits to the Regency in New York, and they gave me my degree in linguistics. Anyway, without my having to go there, because I had done plenty of work at Kalamazoo.
But your plan had been to go to Indiana.
Right. I wanted to go get a master's and maybe a doctorate eventually in linguistics, and perhaps teach linguistics or something. But I got waylaid by Korea, and so here
I know Indiana was or probably still is well known for Central Asian and
for that
mid Asian languages. But
one of the professors there. I admired his work. Householder was his name, and I was interested mostly in historical linguistics rather than just descriptive linguistics. So, but it didn't work out that way. And I was always interested in languages, learning languages, and that was one of my reasons for joining the Peace Corps. I said on my application that I would like to go somewhere where they speak a non-Indo-European language, because I had studied Latin and French and, Hebrew's not Indo-European. I studied a little Hebrew and Russian in high school, and I continued Russian a little bit, and I continued French in college. And so I thought, it would be fun to do a Indo-European language. So I thought, Turkey. I was thinking Turkey, possibly, or maybe some African country. I don't know. But I wasn't thinking of Korea. But they sent me a letter. They said, and I didn't want to do English teaching because I figured I'd never learn the language properly if I was teaching English, because people would constantly be coming to me to help them with their English. So I wanted community development or public health. And they said, they were doing a public health program. They sent me a letter in Korea. And, would you be interested in that? Well, I didn't really know much about Korea because I remember I guess I was in the second grade when the Korean War started, and I remember the teachers putting up pictures of the soldiers going through the snow and all this. So to me, in my mind, Korea was black and white. Because there was newspaper photos. So I didn't really have a proper impression or understanding of Korea. So I went to the school library to see what they had. They had Bishop Richard Rutt's book called Korean Works and Days, in which he describes what the life was like in the countryside. I think he was in Chungcheongnam-do in the 50s, and it was a very nice description, and it kind of appealed to me. So I sent back yes, that I would like to go to Korea, and they sent me a letter. Great, we'll see you at Ghost Ranch on September 6th. But it didn't say where Ghost Ranch was. So I thought, well, Ghost Ranch, it's a ranch. It's got to be west of the Mississippi. So I went to the library and got out the Gazetteer, and I'm looking all over, and I couldn't find any town or anything named Ghost Ranch. I didn't know what, they didn't say Abiquiu or anything. So I never knew where I was actually going until I got my plane ticket, which was to Santa Fe. And so I knew it had to be near Santa Fe, but anyway. So I showed up, and
you had to be ready for just about anything.
Yeah. I showed up with whatever, some simple bags and a guitar and an auto harp and a mandolin. They were like, I think they were a little bit upset because I was very jealous of my, in the traditional meaning of the word jealous. I didn't want that guitar out of my sight. The mandolin and the auto harp, maybe I could let that go for a while. They put those on the truck, and I insisted on carrying the guitar with me. It was a custom-made guitar from Gibson, because when I was an employee there, I was able to get a custom-made guitar cheaply. But anyway, here we were for 16 weeks here, I guess it was. And then we went to Seoul and had another month in Seoul. So we had a little bit longer training, I think, than most. Like the English teachers didn't have anything like that length of training, but we needed it because most of us were not trained in any sort of medical procedures or anything. So we had to learn how to give shots and do the basics, do sputum tests and do stool sample tests and all this kind of stuff. And even how to deliver babies. I never delivered any babies, but Brian Barry, the guy whose memorial we held yesterday, he delivered about 12 babies.
Wow.
There was a rumor, because the first 3 or 4 that he delivered were boys, the country ladies thought that if Brian delivered their baby, it would be a boy. And of course, Brian was trying to explain to them that the sex of the baby has already been determined. But they insisted anyway. But, I guess he wound up delivering some girls later, so that broke the
His
spell.
reputation fell.
Yeah. But I never had to do that. In my first Myeon, we were in Myeon is like a smaller division of a county. It's kind of like a township. And they didn't know what to do with me there, really. I mean, I had the training to help the local workers, the TV worker or whatever, and we also had a leprosy worker I could have helped out with that. But they really didn't know what to do because it's this foreigner who speaks some Korean but not super duper, And so my Myeonjang, the head of the Myeon, really he wasn't particularly sympathetic or interested in the Peace Corps program. So I appealed. Mel Merkin was the representative of the Peace Corps in Daegu, in that region. So after about 5.5 months, I appealed to him to please get me out of there. I liked the local people and everything. It was fine, but the job was terrible. And Mel was very understanding. He came and he took me out of there after 6 months, but he couldn't get me into a county health center, Kun Health Center, until 3 months later. So for 3 months, I went to a place called Chilgok, and I and 4 other volunteers found a small abandoned house that we were able to turn into, we remodeled it and turned it into a maternal and child health center where the mothers could bring their kids for their shots and stuff like that, rather than just going to the Myeon office, which was it just didn't have the atmosphere of a clinic or anything like that. So we did that. And then after 3 months, I went to Tansong-gun Health Center, and that's where I stayed for the rest of the first 2 years.
What province was this?
In Gyeongsangbuk-do, northern Gyeongsan province. And Tansong-gun was sort of like a crescent shape around Daegu City at the time. Now it's been swallowed up by Daegu, so it's all part of Daegu City now. Yes. But at that time, it was still outside the city, And my coworker, I had two coworkers, a male coworker who was afraid of germs, of all things, working in the health center. And he was supposed to be running the lab, and we weren't doing any high-powered stuff like blood tests. We were just doing, sputum samples to see if we had positive TB patients, and stool samples, usually for school kids, And we would go out to the schools and give vaccinations, shots and stuff. And their record-keeping system was terrible. Everything was in a book that was bound already. So you couldn't alphabetize anything. You just recorded things as people came in. And, somebody would come in to get his or her, medicine or something, and they're flipping through, trying to find the person, and there's no numbers. They weren't numbered or anything, and wasting time doing that. So I went out and bought a wooden box with index cards, big index cards that fit in there, and started keeping the records that way. And my coworkers, especially the woman, was interested in that, so I showed her how to do it. And they kept using that system even after I was gone. I re-upped for a year, but I went to the Family Planning Association in Taylor for my last year. So I was a volunteer for 3 years total. And the last year I would go visit the health center just because they were friends of mine and everything. And they continued to use the record-keeping system that I helped them with. And I would go, I always went to the schools to give the shots because the kids, when the pretty young Korean women try to give them shots, it's like, and whereas when I went, they're like, the corner that they had never seen, and they're saying before they knew what hit him, I gave him the shot. And so our director would say, "Oh, take Gary with you. He gets the shots done faster."
A lot of the volunteers have said that they weren't authorized to give shots. That they were.
Well, I don't know if I was authorized or not, but I gave them.
You gave them, okay.
And we learned how to do it here.
They delegated to you.
Yeah. We knew how to do it, so. In those days, they didn't use, for some things, like for PPD, which just goes, it's subcutaneous, you don't actually go into the muscle, they would reuse the needles, and they would, sterilize them over a burner, over an alcohol burner. And that's okay, but, I would have preferred disposable needles. Well, since it was just subcutaneous, probably the worst thing you wouldn't give somebody any serious ailment. They might get a slight infection or something, but we flamed them all the time to make sure that they were sterile. But anything below the skin, I insisted on disposing of the needles. But we didn't have to give many shots like that. I mean, there was a danger of hepatitis. Most Koreans at that time either had hepatitis or they were carriers who were sort of immune to it, but they still carried it. So if somebody gave a shot to somebody who didn't have hepatitis but was a carrier, and then gave it to somebody else who had never been exposed, like most Westerners, then you might get hepatitis. So I, tried to avoid that. But anyway, it was kind of developed into a sort of just routine, do the samples in the lab, go to the schools and give the shots, and blah, 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 It was okay.
A lot of the variation, it sounds like there's quite a bit of variance in the kind of administration there was from one locality to another.
It depended very much on who the boss was and what he thought of you, I think. And some of the volunteers stayed in the Myeon, at the Myeon level, the township level, and worked mostly with their local health worker going around to patients' homes. And I think their role was to inspire the patients to be more diligent about their, taking their medicine and stuff like that, because there was some prestige there. The country people saw that an American was concerned about this and was, helping deliver the medicine or whatever. Then they thought, I think, that maybe we should be more careful about it. I think that was kind of a PR role that they were playing. But I didn't want to do that. So I, like the fact that I was actually doing something functional in the lab at the health center, and with the recording of the but because our language, at that level, just a year or so in, you really don't have a great command of Korean. So it's not that easy to explain to the young workers how to do certain things, or to explain to some patient. Often our patients were uneducated, older people. And anyway, my sojang treated me as if I were one of the Korean workers, even though I wasn't, as fully fluent in Korean the way an Korean educated in Korea would be. But I would have to man the desk where the patients would come to register at lunchtime when everybody was out to lunch. I would have to do that once every 2 weeks, because we took turns, and then I had to do it once every 2 weeks. And we'd have weird things would happen. I mean, one day at lunch, an old lady and her son came in. She was, I'm saying old, she was probably my age, but she comes in and she says, 피병약 있는겨. That's Gyeongsangdo dialect for 폐병약 있는가요? And she says, 피병약 있는겨. And I'm like, 등록하셔야 되는데요. And I get out a 등록 card, and the son is just standing there, not saying anything. And I said, 성함이 어떻게 되십니까? And she says, 내 이름이 뭐더라? She's Chegashi. There are a lot of Chegas in Taekwondo. She knew she was Chegashi, but she couldn't remember her name. And I was like, oh my God, I've come to a country where the women don't know their name. Because they were
always, all relational.
They were
names.
called somebody's mother, somebody from
That's
such a
right.
village or something. And the son said, 끝둘이야, 끝둘. 끝둘 means last daughter. Last 끝딸인데.
Look that up in your file system.
Right, well, and I said, she must have 한자 이름 있을 텐데, Chinese character name. And he says, 그럼 마돌인가, or something like that. So I had to wait until the sojang came back and let him take care of it. I couldn't deal with it. But most of the time, at lunchtime, nobody showed up. And all I had to do was answer the phone. One time, I answered the phone, and I said, and it was the sojang. He said, 전화 제대로 받나 확인하는 거야. I was just checking to see if you're actually answering the phone.
Pass that test.
Right, yeah, and I was, so it worked out.
Did you find that working in a locality in a rural area that your language abilities developed better?
Well, at first, the first 6 months when I was in the Myeon and wasn't really doing much work, yeah, I would go to the market and talk to people and practice. And there was a young fellow there I was 24, he was 19, I guess, at the time, by Mannai, the way we calculate age, not the Korean way. And he was kind of from a poor family. He was studying to take an equivalency exam for high school, And so he asked me if I could help him with his English. So I helped him with that. It wasn't like teaching him regularly, but he would come in with with sample questions from the previous tests, and I would help him with that. And but he would help me with my Korean. There was also a little boy I was in a hasukjip, which is like a room and board house, And there was the lady of the house had a little boy, and I would buy a comic book. Like when I'd go to Taekwondo, I would buy a comic book, Mana Wangu.
Yeah.
And I would read that, and the little kid would come and look at the comic book, and I would have him explain things to me that I didn't know. But the adults don't want to explain stuff to you, or they think, it's just a stupid, why don't you know that? Whereas the kid's very happy to explain everything in the cartoon. So I realized that I could, get him to come and explain stuff to me and just talk to me to practice. And then I would, after we finished looking through the comic book, I'd give it to him. See? So this was, if I did that now, I'd probably be hauled in and, arrested for child molesting or something. But of course,
Pretty suspicious.
but we weren't so PC back then. Anyway, that was fun. So I learned a lot that way. Once in the market, we had one of those markets that is every 5 days. The market is there, and then 4 days is off. But it was, Oiljang. And there was some guy that I was with, the young guy I was telling you about, who was studying for the equivalency exam, and they set up they hung a sheet up and they were showing 8mm movies in the market, you know, in the evening. But we were walking around and there was one guy, I would see him in this aisle in the market and he would like go over to the next aisle. And then we would be wandering around, we'd run into him again and he would like disappear again. And I asked somebody, I said, who is that guy? He seems to be avoiding me. And they said, oh yeah, he's the local high school teacher. He doesn't want anybody to find out that he can't speak English. So anyway, that worked out. So I learned a lot because of the fact, probably because I wasn't really working a lot in the first 6 months. But then after that, in the special 3-month project, I learned quite a bit just because we had to buy materials. So we had to go into Daegu and buy materials and blah, blah, blah. And then Tansunggun, as I said, was right around Daegu. So because Daegu was centrally located to all the different myans, I lived in Daegu. And we would go out, you know. The health center was in one of the myans later on, but at first it was right in Daegu because it was centrally located. So I was actually in an urban area. It wasn't nearly as populated as it is now. Even downtown there were unpaved streets in some parts of town. But, you know, nevertheless, I would, you know, after work I would hang out with my male co-workers in the health center. We'd go out for makgeolli or something, and I called makgeolli my Korean learning medicine, you know, because drink makgeolli, you listen. I spent more time listening to them talk than I did talking myself. But
did you actually like makgeolli?
yeah, I do. Well, if it's good. I don't care for it. Seoul makgeolli is too sweet. They put too much saccharin in it. So I don't really drink much anymore, but I sometimes order makgeolli from Sangju. I know a brewery in Sangju that does it the old traditional way. And I went down there and visited, and it was perfectly clean, and like a clean room, and you have to put the little booties on to go in there. But it's 100 years old. I mean, they just kept it modern all the time. Then for 28,000 won, they'll send you a case, 20 bottles. 750 milliliter, 750 milliliters in each bottle. They'll send you 20 bottles for 28,000 won, and that includes the delivery cost from Sangju to Seoul. So that's pretty cheap. So sometimes I'll do that, but most of the time I just don't, you know, drink anymore much. Back in those days, it was pretty much daily routine. Finish work, go have something to eat, go have some drinks, go home, go to bed, get up, go to work. It's, you know. And on weekends I would try to go visit a temple that was famous, or go to Gyeongju and see something, sightseeing, you know, touristy type stuff. Not every weekend because I couldn't afford it, but you know, maybe once or twice a month we would go somewhere. Or sometimes the health center staff would take us to Pohang or someplace on the weekend. As kind of heshik, you know, kind of just a little outing for everybody who worked there, and we'd go and have sashimi, and because that's by the sea. It was hard to get. In those days, they didn't have refrigerated trucks, so you couldn't get sashimi in the city in Daegu because it was too far inland. So we would have to go to Pohang or Ulsan, one of the cities on the coast, and you know, that's how I learned to like raw fish. I wasn't, you know, I didn't really think I'd like it, but I really did like it.
Did you meet up on a regular basis with other volunteers?
Not on a well, when I was on the 3-month special thing, Joan Witt and Karen Runkle, David Kubiak, Barbara Reardon, who's passed away already, and there were 5 of us on that special 3-month project. Now the only 2 of us who are on that project that are here is Joan Witt and I are here. I don't know if Joan has been in here.
No.
I try to encourage her to come in because
Yeah, please.
So we were working on the same thing together, so we saw each other every day. But of course we also, you know, saw the local Korean staff because we needed their help to fix this place up. I mean, we're not glaziers or anything. I mean, we had to have a professional come in and put in the glass windows. But we did all the varnishing, sanding the floors and varnishing them and all this stuff. And
And this was all on your initiative, I mean, on the initiative of the volunteer.
Well, I think David Kubiak maybe, and they had kind of decided they needed to do something like that. And he was a real wheeler-dealer guy. I mean, we weren't close friends. As a matter of fact, when they asked us in training here, who would you like to be stationed near? And you were supposed to list 4 or 5 people. And who would you not want to be stationed near? Because they wanted to have us, you know, be around people we were compatible with. And I had put David down as one of the people I didn't want to be near, because he was a very aggressive type guy, wheeler-dealer type guy. And I'm not introverted or anything like that, but I'm just not that pushy about things. But I had always said I liked Joan and Karen Runkle, and so it was like a conflict. He was there with them, so I wound up there, and actually we became friends, and we wound up working together, and it all worked out. So I'm kind of glad, actually, that I was put there for that 3-month special thing, because I got over an antagonism I had towards David, and it all worked out. And anyway, I think that was his idea, but he couldn't do that alone, and so we all worked on it together. We would have to go to the Myeon office to get budgeting for the varnishing and all the other stuff. And the Myeon office was cooperative. They had enough budget to help us with that. And somebody came from the State Department at one point. Karen Runkle and I had been in there varnishing and painting, and we were wearing dungarees and t-shirts, and we were all messed up. And this guy from the State Department was touring around Korea to sort of check to see if Peace Corps was actually doing anything, you know. And he came to that little Mojapoganji side. Runkle and I were in there, and he came in, and he started to step onto the freshly varnished floor with his shoes on, and we said, no, you have to take your shoes off. And he's like, well, if the President of the United States came here, would you ask him to take his shoes off? And we said, yeah, and he probably would.
He wouldn't want to stick to the floor.
Just at that moment, Joan walked in. She was late that day. Joan always dressed up, no matter where she was going. So she came in, she was wearing like a lime green chemise or something. I don't remember the color, but she was dressed up, and she had the dingle-dangle earrings and the high heels, and she took off her high heels and got up on the floor. She's very pretty. And the guy just was smitten, and he took off his shoes and got off. And he never said another word about his shoes. And Joan kind of showed him around and explained everything. And he went away satisfied that the Peace Corps actually was doing something. And of course, we were all like, Joan, you came just in the nick of time. But that all worked out. Anyway, after that, when I was in Daesan Health Center, I didn't get to meet other volunteers very often, maybe once a month. We would just decide to meet and go somewhere. Or one time I went to Patricia Wilson, she's here. She was in Agun, not too far from Daegu, so I went to visit her place just to see what it was like. And we had that kind of visiting occasionally, but it wasn't very often. We did have Peace Corps conferences or little retraining sessions, maybe once a year or so.
In Korea?
In Korea, yeah.
Did you have to go up to Seoul?
Once we had to go in September of 1968, we went up to Seoul, and there's a place called Academy House that's up on the side of Pugak Mountain, and we went there for a few days for a retraining thing. And that was because so many people were being transferred to the Gun health centers. So there we got to see a lot of people. But some people who had opted for staying in the Myeon, and the representative had confirmed that they were actually able to do some useful work in the Myeon level, they didn't have to come to that. But ones like me who were like really not being used at all in the Myeon, we all went up there to get this retraining and went to the Gun Health Center. The retraining consisted mostly of changing our focus from a broad range of general public health to tuberculosis control. So
that apparently was a policy change.
Yeah, they decided that the volunteers would do more work and better work if they were focused on one area, and that was why I wound up doing the lab. I mean, we had learned how to do stool samples as a separate thing from the TB, but since the germaphobe guy I was working with didn't want to do them, I did them because I knew how to do them. But it was mostly I was supposed to be doing the sputum samples, so I did that. And anyway, it all worked out. Okay. I don't know, one thing led to another. I was going to stay 2 years, and I was going to just be 3 years, and then it was going to be just the training programs, and then after 5 years, I fell in love with the music.